I stood at the edge of the sect's entrance, staring up at the towering gates. My name is Qin Futian, and today was the day everything changed. I remembered the days of being a laughingstock, a failure everyone looked down on. But those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now. I had a secret. I was a traveler from another world, and I carried the legacy of the Qin Emperor within me. The journey here hadn't been easy. I remembered the cold, iron-shackled dormitories and the smell of rust and sweat. I had been nothing more than a scrap collector in a tattered robe, sitting on the dirt floor. But I refused to stay down. I looked at the crowd gathered for the entrance exam. There were thousands of them, all hoping for a chance at immortality. Among them were Zhao Wenjia and Su Kuei, two geniuses who thought they were untouchable. They stood there, arrogant and cold, showing off their power to the world. They didn't even recognize me. To them, I was just a pebble on the road. Suddenly, a strange sensation washed over me. It was like the world was shifting. I saw flashes of a desolate continent, a battlefield where tens of thousands fought for survival. I saw giant beasts being besieged and a massive wave of sword energy that split the sky. It was a vision of the wildlands, a place where only the strong survived. I saw a master descend from the heavens, a single sword strike calming the chaos. That power, that was what I wanted. I snapped back to reality. I was standing in the middle of the sect trial. The pressure was suffocating. When I first crossed into this body, I was weak and collapsing in a valley. But now, a hidden power was exploding inside me. The elders and the big shots from various factions were watching, their eyes searching for the next great talent. The fight broke out before I knew it. Two massive warriors collided, their energy creating heat waves that scorched the air. A wounded bird-like beast shrieked, its pupils reflecting the brilliant flames of the battle. The wildlands were cruel, and if I didn't step up, I would be swallowed whole. I had spent my days in a tiny shack made of straw, hiding my cultivation. I had to deal with debt collectors and thugs who hunted me down. I remembered the feeling of sand slipping through my fingers. That was how my life felt before. But then, the opportunity came. Su Kuei moved like a shadow, his bricks shattering the ground as he lunged at me. He thought he could end me with one strike. The grudge between the Su family and the Qin family ran deep, and he wanted my head. He was at the Sendai rank, a true warrior, while I was supposed to be a nobody. "Go to hell," he roared, his blade whistling through the air. I didn't flinch. I felt the weight of a mountain behind my own strike. 2 years of hiding and enduring had led to this moment. Suddenly, an old man's phantom appeared behind me, his face stern and ethereal. In that split second, thunder erupted. Su Kuei realized something was wrong, but it was too late. I channeled everything into my legs and launched myself forward. My foot connected squarely with his chest, sending him flying back into the dirt. The crowd went silent. "I am Lu Yuan," I whispered to myself, using the name from my past life as a vow. This wasn't just a fight, it was a statement. I looked down at Su Kuei, who was coughing up blood. I had finally earned my place. I had the talent. I had the right to stand here. I climbed the steps of the sect, leaving the dirt behind. The announcer's voice echoed, calling out the names of the successful disciples. Out of 300 candidates, I was the one they couldn't ignore. People whispered, wondering how a commoner like me could possess such a terrifying sword technique. They thought it was a fluke. They thought I was just lucky. Let them think what they want. I held the legend of the hidden sovereign in my hands. I was a traveler in a world of monsters and immortals, and I was just getting started. 13 years of hidden cultivation in the mountains had prepared me for this. I stood on the new path, looking toward the horizon. I was no longer the broken boy in a straw hut. I was Qin Futian, and I would shake this empire to its core. I felt the surge of the pulse realm, seventh heaven, flowing through me. My master had promised to guide me, but the real power came from within. I closed my eyes and began to breathe, ready to conquer the heavens. I stood there, the adrenaline still pumping through my veins. I remembered the pact I had made with Su Jingming. We had promised that the next time we met, we would have a real battle. He probably thought I was a joke now. I could hear the whispers in the crowd. They thought I was only here because I was clinging to a dead marriage contract with the Qin family. They thought I was desperate. They didn't know me. I wasn't the type to beg. But the outer disciples didn't care. They mocked me, saying a man with a broken dantian had no right to be here. My engagement to Qin Xian was the only thing they saw. To them, I was a parasite. Then came the offer. They wanted me to give up the contract. In exchange, they offered me cultivation resources, a high-grade Jidao weapon, and a formal apology. My internal guide, the system, whispered in my mind. It told me this was the best compensation I would ever get. Part of me wanted to refuse out of pride, but I needed power more than I needed a piece of paper. I didn't care about the girl. I cared about the path ahead. To protect myself and Jiang Yunlan, I had to secure my spot as an official outer disciple. The selection process was brutal. I watched Gongsun Yuan Wang from a distance. He was the one everyone feared. He was a predator, and he was looking for his next victim. My next opponent was Qin Xian. He stepped onto the stage with a smug look on his face. He thought I was an easy win. He thought my previous victory was a fluke. I didn't say a word. I just waited. When the signal reached my ears, I moved. I tapped into the power I had hidden for 13 years. It felt like ancient thunder rolling through my limbs. Qin Xian tried to strike, but I was already behind him. I channeled the flow of the heavens into my palm and struck. The force shattered his defense instantly. He collapsed, gasping for air, before he even realized what happened. The crowd went dead silent again. I didn't stay to enjoy the shock. I walked off the stage, my eyes fixed on the horizon. I was moving up. I was no longer the broken boy from the straw hut. I looked up and saw Qin's son watching me from the shadows. His eyes were cold, filled with a strange intensity. I met his gaze and didn't flinch. My journey was just beginning, and I would tear down anyone who stood in my way. I was Qin Futian, and the heavens were finally listening. The air at Inner Sea Mountain felt heavy, like the sky was about to collapse. Gongsun Moang and Huanggu Shiyu were watching me from the sidelines, their eyes filled with a murderous intent. They were waiting for the perfect moment to send me to my grave. I didn't care. I stepped forward, my every movement echoing with a cold, rhythmic power. I ignored the whispers of the crowd and the lingering shock from my last fight. I had no time for nonsense. Suddenly, a strange sensation washed over me. It felt like the ocean was crashing inside my mind. A familiar, cold voice echoed in my head, my system. It told me that the strongest sects from the outside world were beginning to notice this place. If I wanted to survive, I had to turn my sect into the most powerful force in existence. The system offered a deal. If I recruited a 10-star genius, I'd get a massive gift pack filled with rare scrolls and power-up cards. The higher the talent, the bigger the reward. It was a tempting offer, but I had a more immediate problem to solve. Lei Chong stepped onto the stage, his body radiating a terrifying pressure. He was a monster, a possessor of the heavenly wolf chaos body. He moved like a bolt of lightning, his soul as sharp as a blade. He looked at me with pure disdain, thinking I was just a weakling who got lucky. He spun his spirit energy into a massive sword net, trying to trap me. The crowd held their breath. They thought I was finished. I saw the opening. I watched the way his energy flickered in his eyes, the eye of the heavenly wolf. He was fast, but he was arrogant. I channeled the ancient thunder in my veins and struck. It wasn't just a physical hit. It was a surge of draconic energy that tore through his defenses. I felt his life force snap. With one decisive blow, I sent him flying off the stage, his body broken and lifeless. The silence that followed was deafening. I had just killed a genius of the heavenly wolf bloodline. The spectators started whispering in fear. They couldn't understand how someone at my level could possess such overwhelming power. Even experts at the 9th level of the pulse condensation realm would have struggled to survive that exchange. I stood there, calm, as the system confirmed my victory. But the danger wasn't over. The Godsword team, a group of elite disciples, was already moving. They were furious that I had killed one of their own. A man named Sun Ming approached me, his face pale with worry. He told me to run, warning me that Qin Sun wouldn't be able to protect me forever. He said the Godsword team wouldn't stop until my head was on a pike. I looked at him and didn't move an inch. They thought they could intimidate me with their titles and their numbers. They thought I was a cornered animal. They were wrong. I wasn't the one who needed to hide. I was Qin Futian, and if the Godsword team wanted a war, I was more than ready to give them one. I looked toward the horizon, my resolve hardening. My path was covered in blood, and I was just getting started. The crowd was a sea of faces, divided by status and power. There were the inner circles of the heavenly immortals and the outer rings where the elders and various family members sat, their eyes fixed on me. The air was thick with the scent of sweat and tension. I could feel the weight of their judgment. In their eyes, I was a killer, a disruptor of the status quo. But history is written by the survivors. I knew that if I didn't kill these so-called geniuses, they would have certainly killed me. I stood in the center of the arena, my senses heightened by the god eye. I could see things others couldn't. I noticed Ling Fan watching me from a distance, his gaze filled with a murderous intent that felt like cold steel against my skin. He was already plotting his next move. Even the elders of the various families were whispering, their long-winded discussions about honor and rules sounding like nothing more than white noise to me. I looked at Qin Fu and gave him a mocking smile. I didn't care about their traditions or their warnings. My focus shifted to the inner gates of the Xingtian sect, where the real power resided. I knew the Godsword team wasn't finished. They wanted my head to redeem their lost pride. One man in particular, an elite disciple, was already moving toward me. He carried a heavy purse, 10,000 silver taels, a bounty on my life. He wanted to kill me with his own 2 hands and claimed the reward that even the sect master had acknowledged. The spectators were trembling. None of them dared to meet my eyes. They had seen what I did to the heavenly wolf, and they knew I wasn't afraid to spill blood. The atmosphere was suffocating. I took a deep breath, feeling the energy circulate through my body. I wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. I was fighting to dismantle their entire hierarchy. Suddenly, Qin Tianxian stepped forward. He was a powerhouse, his presence alone enough to make the air vibrate. He looked at the disciples of the Godsword team and then turned his gaze toward me. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, not quite respect, but a recognition of strength. He warned me to think twice, to consider the consequences of challenging a sect as old and powerful as theirs. I didn't blink. I told him that if the Godsword team wanted to hide behind their titles, they were welcome to try. My words cut through the silence like a blade. I wasn't going to play their games. I wasn't going to be the clever one who runs away. I was the one who was going to break them. The sun began to set, casting long, bloody shadows across the stage. The horizon looked like it was on fire, a fitting backdrop for the carnage I knew was coming. A group of soldiers, thousands of them, seemed to appear at the edges of the territory, their armor gleaming in the dying light. It was an overwhelming force, a display of might meant to crush my spirit. But then, a figure blocked my path. It was Chun Xian, leading a group of guards. He looked at me with a frown, his voice cold and impatient. He told me to move, saying I had no right to stand in the way of the great families. I looked at him, then at the massive gates of the 15 territories beyond. To them, I was a nobody, a minor character in their grand story. They were wrong. I felt a surge of energy within me, and a notification echoed in my mind. I had obtained 2 Great Emperor summoning cards. This wasn't just a battle for a sect anymore. This was the beginning of an empire. I looked at Lu Yuan and the others who thought they could control me. They wanted a war. Fine. I would give them one they would never forget. A chime rang in my head, cold and mechanical. I had done it. I had obtained 2 Great Emperor summoning cards, along with a guaranteed reward, the 4-eyed heavenly general, Xianjiju. Every divine flame spirit I summoned from here on out would be bound to me with unconditional loyalty. The system informed me that if I collected 10 discard cards, I could summon something even higher. The path ahead was no longer just a struggle for survival. It was a calculated march toward dominance. I looked at the vast expanse of the central plains in my mind and felt a surge of ambition. I pressed a mental button, and the rewards began to flood in. One after another, the notifications for Great Ceremony, rewards flashed like a strobe light, stacking up until they filled my vision. The crowd was buzzing. A man named Qin Futian had become the center of attention. People were whispering about his continuous succession ritual. They looked at him, surprised that someone with his looks actually possessed such terrifying strength. Some suggested he should head to Nanzhuang Road or return to the Earth Dragon sect. I watched him. He had awakened a top-tier special ability. In a sect as large as theirs, having 2 geniuses like that was unheard of. It was almost unbelievable. But the pride of these so-called elites was their downfall. They couldn't accept that their own disciples were being overshadowed. The sect elders weren't sitting idle. They had already sent inquiries to the Qin emperor, trying to figure out who was responsible for this rise. At the same time, they were eyeing Qin Futian's Dantian. They knew his foundation was flawless, unlike the others who struggled for every inch of progress. Qin Futian didn't care about their greed. Even with the summoning cards he just received, he remained obsessed with his cultivation. Rumors spread that his cultivation hadn't actually dissipated, despite the heavy injuries he had taken. People speculated his realm was only at the 7th level of the pulse opening realm, but the intensity of his energy told a different story. He hadn't participated in the high-level exams, yet he had managed to become the talk of the Great Heaven Mountain. Some said he was at the Spirit Pill Pavilion, staring at a mountain of hourglasses, lost in meditation. The truth was simpler but more dangerous. Qin Futian had entered the pill abyss. He carried a professional-grade ability, but his real secret was his broken Dantian. It had been shattered and reborn, turning him into a monster of efficiency. He had abandoned the traditional fire martial sword body for something far more ancient and primal. The air grew heavy as the final showdown approached. The battle between Qin Futian and Jiang Yunan had been brewing for a long time. This wasn't just about a sect rank anymore. It was personal. There was talk of a broken engagement and a grudge that could only be settled in blood. The crowd watched as the two of them took their places. Jiang Yunan wasn't weak. He had activated his ancient sword body, and a group of elite disciples stood behind him like a wall of steel. But as I looked at Qin Futian, I saw a man who had already moved past these petty squabbles. "Futian brother," a voice called out. A young girl, Gong Sun Hong, ran toward him. She was glowing with excitement, seeing that he had not only recovered but had grown stronger. Qin Futian smiled at her, a rare moment of warmth in the cold atmosphere of the arena. Then, the mood shifted. 12 soul shadows drifted into the area. "Qin Futian, come and fight," a voice thundered. It was time. Jiang Yunan stepped forward, his confidence radiating off him in waves. He didn't want to waste any more time. His blood was boiling, his energy peaking. He looked at Qin Futian with eyes full of contempt, fueled by the bitterness of their past. Gongsun Hong's face paled. She shouted for him to be careful, but the challenge had already been issued. "A battle for dignity," someone whispered. Jiang Yunan gripped his spear, the tip glowing with a sharp, piercing light. He lunged. The air screamed as he moved, a blur of motion aimed directly at Qin Futian's heart. It was a move meant to end things in a single strike. To the crowd, it looked like Qin Futian was standing still, trapped in the path of an unstoppable force. But I saw the truth. He wasn't trapped. He was waiting. The contract between them, the broken promises, and the years of mockery, it was all coming to a head right here. He didn't need a fancy sword technique. He just needed to strike once. I stood my ground as Jiang Yunan's spear whistled through the air, aimed straight for my chest. To the crowd, it looked like I was frozen in fear, a broken cultivator about to be crushed by the weight of an ancient sword body. But I wasn't afraid. I was calculating. Jiang Yunan's eyes flashed with a mix of hatred and triumph. He wanted this over quickly. He wanted to erase the shame of our past and prove that a man with a shattered Dantian was nothing more than a bug to be stepped on. His spear tip glowed with a piercing light, a lethal strike fueled by years of bitterness. "Die, Qin Futian," he roared. The air around the arena seemed to ripple from the sheer force of his energy. I felt the sharp sting of his killing intent on my skin, but I didn't flinch. I let my primal energy simmer just beneath the surface, hidden from the prying eyes of the sect elders and the Godsword team. They thought I was defenseless. They were wrong. Just as the spear was inches from my heart, I moved. It wasn't a flashy technique or a complex maneuver. It was a simple, fluid shift of my weight. The spear tip grazed my robes, missing my flesh by a hair's breadth. The crowd gasped. Jiang Yunan's face contorted in shock as his momentum carried him forward, his lethal strike hitting nothing but empty air. "Is that all?" I asked quietly. My voice carried across the silent arena. Jiang Yunan spun around, his face flushing a deep, angry red. He couldn't believe I had dodged him so easily. He gripped his spear tighter, his knuckles turning white. He wasn't just fighting me anymore. He was fighting the realization that I wasn't the weakling he remembered. "You're just a bug relying on luck," he spat, his energy flaring even higher. He launched into a flurry of strikes, his spear becoming a blur of silver light. Each thrust was aimed at a vital point, designed to tear me apart. I danced through the storm of steel, my movements calm and precise. I could see the gaps in his technique, the flaws born from his arrogance. He was powerful, yes, but he was sloppy. In the stands, I saw Gong Sun Hong's worried face relax slightly. Beside her, the elders were leaning forward, their greedy eyes narrowing as they tried to figure out how I was surviving. They wanted my secrets. They wanted the power they thought I had stolen. I felt a surge of cold determination. This wasn't just a battle for my dignity. This was a message to everyone watching. The Qin Futian they knew was gone. In his place stood someone they should fear. "My turn," I whispered. I didn't use a weapon. I didn't need one. I channeled a fraction of the power from my system rewards into my fist. The air around my hand began to vibrate, a faint, golden glow shimmering over my skin. Jiang Yunan saw it too late. He tried to bring his spear up to block, but I was faster. My fist connected with the shaft of his spear, and the sound of snapping would echoed through the arena. The force of the blow sent him reeling back, his weapon shattered into pieces. He hit the ground hard, gasping for air, the confidence drained from his face. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood over him, the golden glow fading from my hand. I looked up at the elders, at the God Sword team, and at the thousands of people who had come to watch me fall. I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was a threat. And this was only the beginning. The crowd was paralyzed. I could see the confusion etched on every face in the stands. They couldn't understand how a man with a shattered dantian was standing his ground against a genius like Jiang Yunan. Even the elders, who usually looked down on everyone, were leaning forward so far they were almost falling out of their seats. They realized this wasn't luck. It was raw, overwhelming power. Jiang Yunan scrambled to his feet, his face twisted in a mask of pure rage. He couldn't accept it. He had spent his entire life being told he was a prodigy, a lion among sheep. He activated his ancient sword body again, but this time, he pushed it to a dangerous limit. A dark, serpentine aura began to coil around his remaining weapon. It was the snake's spirit manual, a high-level cultivation technique he had spent years perfecting. In his mind, he was still the predator. I watched him with cold eyes. To the audience, his movements were a blur of lethal precision. To me, he looked like he was moving through water. My system rewards had granted me more than just strength. They had given me a level of perception that made his genius techniques look like child's play. I felt the primal chaos energy swirling within me, a force that didn't just follow the laws of heaven, it dictated them. "You think you're a lion?" I said, my voice cutting through the sound of his whistling blade. "You're just a cub playing in the dirt." He let out a guttural scream and lunged. The air screamed as his blade tore toward my throat. It was a strike meant to decapitate, fueled by every ounce of his pride. I didn't draw a weapon. I didn't even shift my stance. I simply raised a single finger. The collision sounded like a mountain cracking open. A shock wave rippled out from the point of contact, shattering the stone tiles beneath our feet. My finger didn't have a scratch on it. His blade, however, was trembling so violently that the vibrations were traveling up his arm, tearing his muscles apart. I saw Jiang Zhinshan, his father, stand up in the VIP box. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of horror and disbelief. He had told everyone that his son was invincible. Now, he was watching his legacy crumble against a single finger. I felt the power of my 4 newly awakened immortal veins surging. They weren't just standard energy channels. They were conduits of a higher existence. Jiang Yunan's energy tried to invade my body, but it was swallowed instantly by the void within me. He was gasping now, his eyes bloodshot, realizing that no matter how hard he pushed, he was hitting an immovable wall. "This is the gap between us," I whispered, loud enough only for him to hear. I flicked my finger. The force sent him flying across the arena like a rag doll. He crashed into the reinforced walls, the impact leaving a massive crater in the stone. Dust and debris rained down on his limp body. The god sword genius was broken, his pride shattered along with his bones. The silence in the arena was absolute. I turned my gaze toward the elders and the god sword team. They were no longer looking at me with greed. They were looking at me with terror. I had just turned their world upside down, and I wasn't finished yet. This wasn't just a victory. It was a declaration of war against anyone who thought they could stand in my way. I stood in the center of the arena, the dust still settling around Jiang Yunan's broken body. To the crowd, I was a cripple who had somehow performed a miracle. They didn't understand that I wasn't just back. I was operating on a level they couldn't even comprehend. My system had already calculated the next move, and the rewards were flowing in. 2 million experience points flooded my veins as a hidden environment compensation. The world around me seemed to slow down, every vibration in the air becoming a clear signal to my heightened senses. I looked down at the jade-white rings on my fingers. These weren't just jewelry. They were the keys to the heaven-shattering, earth-shaking summoning. My loyal general, Xian Jiju, stood ready in the shadows, but I knew I needed more. The system buzzed in my mind, offering a fusion. If I combined the Great Emperor cards, I wouldn't just summon a protector, I would summon a force that could level cities. The elders were whispering now. I could hear them. They were terrified of my growth, but their greed was still winning. They thought they could wait 3 days, let me exhaust my energy, and then strike. They were planning to send the elite disciples to test me under the guise of a sect promotion. Little did they know, I was already 10 steps ahead. I didn't need to go to the Godsword sect's main gate to find them. I knew they were already gathering at the far side arena, trying to recruit the losers I had just humiliated. If you want my life, come and take it, I muttered, my voice carrying across the silent stands. I turned my back on the VIP box, ignoring Jiang Jinshan's murderous glare. I had a bigger mission. In the distance, beyond the city walls, I felt a familiar, chilling presence. The ancient sword body wasn't unique to Jiang Yunan. There were others, monsters hidden in the small sects and branch families, who were waiting for their chance to devour my talent. They saw me as a treasure chest waiting to be cracked open. I walked toward the exit, my footsteps heavy and rhythmic. Chun Xian and Lu Yuan, the 2 geniuses who had looked down on me earlier, were standing by the gate. They tried to block my path, their faces twisted with a mix of arrogance and hesitation. Chun Xian drew his blade, the cold steel reflecting the afternoon sun. He claimed he was here to reclaim the honor of the Hanxing Valley. I didn't even slow down. I felt the primal energy within me flare up, a surge of heat that made the air shimmer. Before he could even swing, I released a burst of killing intent so sharp it felt like a physical blade. The ground beneath his feet cracked. He froze, his sword trembling just like Jiang Yunan's had. The gap between us isn't just about cultivation levels, I said, stepping past him. It's about destiny. I headed toward the mountains. The system had alerted me to a disturbance in the spiritual veins nearby. Something ancient was waking up, drawn by the massive energy I had released during the fight. I could feel the souls of thousands of fallen warriors humming in the earth, a resonance that only I could hear. This wasn't just a blood feud anymore. It was a war for the very soul of this world. I reached into my storage space and gripped a red silk cord, a relic I had recovered from the ruins of my past life. My mission was clear. I would rebuild my empire, one broken genius at a time. And if the heavens themselves tried to stop me, I would simply tear them down. I felt the shift in the air before I saw it. A cold, oppressive aura washed over the arena, thick as mountain mist. Jiang Yunan's spear was inches from my chest, but I didn't flinch. To the crowd, I looked like a dead man walking. To me, he was just another obstacle. I could see the tiny cracks in his technique, the desperation masked by his ancient sword body. A sudden surge of killing intent erupted from the sidelines. It wasn't from Jiang Yunan. It was dark, ancient, and smelled of blood. My internal system hummed, warning me of a hidden threat lurking in the shadows of the elite Godsword team. I felt a chill like ice water running down my spine. Someone was watching, waiting for me to slip up. I shifted my weight, my feet grinding into the stone tiles. The ground cracked under the pressure of my primal energy. I didn't just block his strike. I absorbed the impact, letting the force flow through me and into the earth. The onlookers gasped. They expected me to be blown apart. Instead, I stood like an unshakable mountain. Is this all your ancient body can do? I asked, my voice low and steady. I saw the flicker of fear in his eyes. He knew. He realized that the gap between us wasn't just about cultivation levels. It was about the soul. I reached into my soul space, feeling the heat of the great emperor summoning cards. I didn't need them yet, but their presence gave me a terrifying confidence. The elders in the high seats were whispering now. I heard the name, Yuan Hun Temple, being tossed around. They were already plotting to recruit me, or kill me if I refused. One elder, Chen Xiong, watched me with eyes like a hawk. He didn't care about the feud. He cared about the power I was hiding. He spoke of destiny and potential, but all I smelled was greed. Suddenly, a young woman stepped forward from the crowd, her movements fluid and graceful. Her name was Pang Yangshi. She looked at me not with greed, but with a strange, piercing curiosity. She offered me a chance to join her sect, promising protection from the vultures circling me. My father says you have a darkness in you, she said, her voice cutting through the noise. But he also says you're the only one who can survive what's coming. I looked at her, then at the bloodthirsty crowd. They wanted a show. They wanted to see a fallen genius get crushed. I thought about the 3 years of humiliation I had endured, the broken dantian, and the cold nights in the Hanqing Valley. I'm not joining anyone, I replied, my voice echoing across the arena. I don't need a sect to protect me. I am the sect. The atmosphere turned electric. Jiang Yunan let out a guttural roar, his pride shattered by my indifference. He lunged again, his spear glowing with a frantic, unstable light. He was burning his very life force to kill me. I didn't use a flashy technique. I didn't call upon the system. I simply moved. In one blurred motion, I drew a rusted blade I had picked up earlier. With a single, rhythmic strike, a move I had practiced 1,000 times in the silence of the mountains, I cut through his momentum. The clash sounded like a thunderclap. The shockwave sent the nearest disciple stumbling back. When the dust settled, I was standing behind him. My blade was clean. His spear was snapped in two. I felt the eyes of the god's sword team on me, their hands gripping their hilts. They realized I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was a predator. I looked up at the darkening sky, the clouds swirling like a brewing storm. This battle was over, but the war for this world had just begun. I wasn't just reclaiming my honor. I was building an empire on the bones of anyone foolish enough to stand in my way. I watched Jiang Yunan's broken body slide across the stone. My strike had been precise, but the crowd was still in shock. They couldn't see the depth of my power, only the result. My movements were so fast they seemed like a blur, a trick of the light. I had refined my energy to such a degree that even the keenest eyes among the elders couldn't track my blade. To them, it looked like I had simply appeared behind him. I felt a sudden shift in the air. The Godsword team wasn't just watching anymore, they were moving. 2 men stepped forward from the ranks, their auras heavy and suffocating. These weren't ordinary disciples. They were Song Zihua and Lu Qing, elite killers who had survived countless battles. They didn't care about the rules of the arena or the dignity of a duel. They saw a threat, and they were trained to eliminate it. Qin Futian, Song Zihua growled, his voice like grinding stones. You've hidden your strength well, but arrogance in front of the Godsword team usually ends in a shallow grave. I didn't back down. I looked at them with cold indifference. I knew their history. They were part of a lineage that had dominated these territories for 10,000 years. But I had the memories of a sovereign and the backing of a system that made their ancient techniques look like child's play. I thought of the long road ahead, of the empire I intended to build, and the girl from my past who was still waiting for me in the upper realms. These men were just pebbles in my path. Suddenly, the sky darkened further. A cold wind swept through the arena, carrying the scent of iron and ancient dust. It felt as if the very world was reacting to the killing intent radiating from the stage. Song Zihua and Lu Qing didn't wait for a signal. They moved in perfect synchronization, their movements a lethal dance of silver and steel. One lunged with a heavy spear, the tip whistling as it tore through the air, while the other circled to my flank with a jagged short sword. They weren't trying to test me. They were going for the kill. I felt my primal energy surge, filling my veins with a heat that defied the freezing wind. I didn't reach for my system rewards yet. I wanted to feel their steel. I wanted to show them that even without my summons, I was their superior. The spearhead reached my chest, but I didn't parry. I stepped into the strike, my shoulder grazing the shaft as I drove my fist into Song Zhihua's sternum. The impact sounded like a drum. At the same time, I spun, my leg connecting with Lu Qing's wrist, sending his short sword spinning into the dirt. Is this the best the God Sword team has to offer? I asked, my voice flat. They scrambled back, their faces pale. They had expected a wounded animal. Instead, they found a monster. I could see the realization dawning in their eyes. I wasn't just a fallen genius who got lucky. I was something they couldn't categorize. I looked toward the elders' platform. They were whispering, their greed replaced by a growing, frantic fear. They realized that if I walked out of this arena alive, the balance of power in the 15 territories would be shattered forever. I raised my rusted blade again. It was chipped and dull, but in my hands, it felt heavier than any divine artifact. I wasn't going to wait for them to regroup. I was going to finish this. You wanted to see a show? I whispered, the words meant only for the men standing before me. I'll give you a massacre. I lunged. The world slowed down. I could see the sweat on their brows and the trembling of their fingers. With a series of rapid-fire strikes, 1, 2, 3, 4, I broke their rhythm and their bones. They fell to their knees, their elite armor shattered by the sheer force of my internal energy. I stood over them, the silence of the crowd now absolute. I wasn't just Qin Futian the survivor anymore. I was the man who had brought the God Sword team to its knees. I turned my gaze back to the horizon. The test was over. The conquest had begun. I swept my cold gaze across the arena as Jiang Yunan closed the distance. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the climax of a grudge that had simmered for far too long. Jiang Yunan's spear whistled through the air, aimed directly at my throat. To the crowd, I was a dead man. To me, he was just a cockroach scurrying across the floor. I didn't flinch. I didn't even draw a better weapon. I raised my fist, channeling the primal energy of the five-fold punch. It wasn't just a strike, it was a mountain collapsing. When our energies collided, the air screamed. Jiang Yunan's elite spear, the pride of his ancient sword body, shattered like cheap glass. I watched his eyes widen as my fist connected with his chest. The sound of his ribs snapping echoed through the silent stadium. He flew backward, crashing into the stone wall of the arena, leaving a crater behind. He didn't get up. He was a heap of broken armor and ruined flesh. Is that it? I asked, looking at the elders. Panic erupted. The disciples of the God Sword team realized their champion had been turned into a memory in a single breath. Some tried to flee, stumbling over their own feet as they scrambled toward the exits. They saw the golden light radiating from me, the mark of a monster they couldn't control. Suddenly, the ground trembled. Two massive carriages, as large as small houses, thundered into the arena grounds. The banners of the Beidou Sword Sect and the Chun Sword Sect fluttered violently in the wind. These weren't just reinforcements. These were the heavy hitters. Jiang Zhenan, Jiang Yunan's father, leaped from the lead carriage. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He looked at the crater where his son lay, and then at me. His killing intent was so thick it felt like ice on my skin. Qin Futian, he roared, his voice shaking the very foundations of the arena. I will grind your bones to dust. I stood my ground, my expression flat. I could feel the presence of my own allies nearby. Xianjiju was ready, and the power of the great emperor cards pulsed in my mind like a heartbeat. You're late, old man, I said, my voice carrying over the chaos. Your son already lost. If you want to join him in the dirt, step forward. The crowd gasped. I was challenging the head of a major sect while standing in the middle of a battlefield. Jiang Zhenan didn't wait. He drew a massive blade, the edge glowing with a sinister red light. He wasn't just trying to kill me. He was trying to erase my existence. Beside him, Chun Xian and the other elders began to circle me. They realized that their individual greed had to be set aside to deal with the threat I posed. They were the wolves, and I was the prey, or so they thought. I felt a surge of energy from the system. It was time to stop playing. I didn't just want to survive this day, I wanted to own it. I reached into my soul, calling upon the strength that had returned to me. The 15 territories had been ruled by these fossils for too long. You talk about dignity and blood feuds, I said, stepping toward Jiang Jinan. But all I see is a group of old men afraid of the future. I felt the air shift as I prepared my next move. The conquest wasn't just starting, it was already here. And I was the one holding the blade. Jiang Jinan's roar was like a thunderclap, but to me, it was just noise. I watched him with a cold detachment that seemed to unnerve the elders. Within a single second, the atmosphere shifted. The pressure from his blade was immense, but I didn't buckle. I felt the system's power shielding my senses. I wasn't just some disciple anymore. I was a force they couldn't calculate. Lu Yuan and the others hesitated. They saw the calm in my eyes and felt a flicker of genuine fear. I wasn't acting like a man with a shattered dantian. I was acting like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. Your son's life was a debt he owed, I said, my voice cutting through the wind. If you want to settle the rest of it, come and get it. Jiang Jinan didn't need a second invitation. He lunged, his massive blade whistling through the air. I didn't retreat. Instead, I moved with a fluid speed that defied their understanding of my injuries. I could see the confusion on the faces of the inner sect disciples watching from the sidelines. They had spent years practicing their footwork, yet here I was, moving like a ghost. I thought back to the past few weeks, the struggle, the betrayal, and the long road to the Jade Peak. Every insult I had endured was fuel for the fire burning in my chest. I looked at Chun Xian and the elders of the Godsword team. They thought they were the masters of this domain. They thought they could decide who lived and who died based on their own greed. You call yourselves protectors of the sect, I spat, parrying a strike that would have crushed a lesser man. But you're just vultures picking at the bones of the talented. I felt the presence of my army, the great Qin soldiers I had summoned in spirit, standing behind me. I wasn't alone in this arena. I carried the weight of a legacy they couldn't even dream of. Jiang Jinan's eyes were bloodshot. He realized his techniques weren't landing. He tried to activate his final killing move, a burst of energy meant to vaporize everything in a 10-meter radius. I saw the light gathering at the tip of his blade. I didn't blink. I reached into my soul and pulled at the strings of the system one more time. A dark, metallic hum filled the air. My energy didn't just meet his, it swallowed it. Is this it? I asked, stepping into his personal space. Is this the best the Jiang family has to offer? The crowd went silent. The elders stopped their circling. They saw the truth now. I wasn't just surviving, I was dominating. The battle for dignity was over. This was a massacre in the making. I looked toward the horizon, toward the mountains that led to the Thunder Valley. My journey wouldn't end here. It was only the beginning. I raised my hand, and for the first time, I let the full weight of my killing intent explode. The ground beneath us cracked. The air turned heavy, like lead. I saw Jiang Jinan's confidence shatter. He finally understood. He wasn't fighting a disgraced disciple. He was fighting a king. I watched Jiang Jinan's face crumble. He had bet everything on a single strike, sacrificing decades of his life force for one desperate chance at survival. To the crowd, he looked like a phoenix rising, but to me, he was just a dying bird flapping its wings in the dirt. I stood my ground as the air around us turned into a vacuum. The spectators were whispering. I heard their doubts cutting through the wind. They thought I had found some forbidden scroll or a shortcut to power. They couldn't understand how a man who had been a waste a year ago was now standing over the elite of the Jiang family. They predicted my fall, whispering that even if I won today, I would eventually be crushed by the weight of time. They were wrong. I felt the system hum inside my mind, responding to my victory. A notification flashed, clear and cold. I had received 2 Great Emperor summoning cards and 2 Saint summoning cards. But the real prize was the ultimate Chaos Tower, a trial grounds where every floor was a different world. It was a place where my disciples could fight and die in 100% realistic simulations without actually losing their lives. It was the perfect forge for an army. And then, the ultimate reward, the divine skill, 10,000 swords returning to the sect. I looked at the elders of the Heaven Sword sect. Chun Xian and Lu Yuan were watching me with eyes full of greed and suspicion. They weren't just looking at a disciple. They were looking at a treasure chest they wanted to crack open. Lu Yuan, in particular, was already plotting. He had used his status to hoard rare herbs and resources, thinking he could outpace me. He was arrogant, moving toward the ultimate chaos path as if it belonged to him by birthright. 7 days, I said, my voice carrying across the arena. In 7 days, the sect trials begin. I turned my back on the broken Jiang Jinan. I didn't need to finish him. His own shame would do that. I walked toward the ruins of the outer hall where my few loyal followers waited. Old Kai and the others looked at me with a mix of awe and fear. Among them stood a young woman, her eyes sharp and full of a familiar fire. She wanted to follow me, to learn the secrets of my strength. I looked at the immortal crystal in my hand, feeling its raw, pulsing energy. You want to catch up to me? I asked her, my voice cold. Then start as my servant. If you can handle that, maybe you'll survive what's coming. It sounded cruel to the onlookers, but I knew the truth. This world didn't care about talent or dignity. It cared about results. I retreated to my private quarters, ignoring the politics and the jealous glares. I had work to do. I opened my system interface and looked at the new summoning cards. The power I held now was enough to topple a small kingdom, but it wasn't enough for what lay beyond the mountains. I sat down and began to circulate my energy, feeling the 10,000 swords technique etching itself into my soul. The air in the room began to vibrate. Thousands of invisible blades formed in the spirit world around me, pointing outward. Lu Yuan and the others thought they were the hunters. They thought they could wait for me to tire out and then pick my bones clean. They didn't realize I was already 10 steps ahead of them. They were playing at cultivation. I was building an empire. The 7-day countdown had started. By the time the sect trials arrived, the Heaven Sword sect wouldn't just be a place of learning for me. It would be my first conquest. I closed my eyes, the metallic hum of the Chaos Tower echoing in my ears, and prepared to show them what a real king looked like. I sat in the silence of my room, pulling every scrap of energy into my core. Every step of my cultivation had to be perfect. I wasn't just building strength. I was refining my very thoughts to reach a peak no one else could touch. I needed to master the sacred ground techniques before the real trial began. I had heard whispers about the Rule's secret realm. It was a legendary space that appeared only once in a blue moon, filled with the treasures of ancient geniuses. The rules were simple. Only those under 30 could enter. When that gate opened, every talent from the surrounding territories would be clawing for a spot. They wanted the glory. I wanted the power. Lu Yuan and the others were still watching me like vultures. They stayed at the higher levels of the sect, thinking they could look down on me. They didn't understand how I could refine energy so quickly without burning out. They saw me as a fluke, a murderer who got lucky in the arena. I could hear their whispers, but I didn't care. I pulled out the creation water I had obtained. Most cultivators would treat this stuff like liquid gold, sipping it drop by drop over years. They were cowards. They were afraid the raw power would shatter their meridians. I wasn't. I forced the energy into my body, feeling it scrub away the filth left behind by my predecessor's broken past. The man whose life I took over was a discarded son of the Yi family. His foundation was a mess, full of cracks and weaknesses. If I didn't fix it now, I'd hit a wall later. The process was agonizing. It felt like 1,000 tiny blades were carving my insides. I didn't make a sound. I just kept pushing. Outside, the sect was buzzing. The disciple recruitment assembly was starting, and the atmosphere was thick with tension. Hundreds of new students were arriving, all of them hoping to make a name for themselves. Little did they know, the Heaven Sword sect was about to face a storm they weren't prepared for. I spent the next few days in a trance of blood and steel. Through my internal vision, I watched the way the disciples practiced their sword forms. To them, they were performing ancient arts. To me, their moves were full of holes. After my refinement, I could see the truth behind every strike. I saw the flaws they were too blind to notice. News started spreading about the rebellion in the neighboring territories. The Qi family's second son was stirring up trouble, and the local clans were starting to fight among themselves. The world was sliding into chaos. I knew these small-time skirmishes were just the beginning. I looked at the communication charms I had collected. They were my link to the outside world, to the players who actually moved the pieces on the board. I wasn't going to spend my life hiding in a sect mountain. I stood up, feeling my new strength ripple through my limbs. The creation water had done its job. My foundation was no longer a liability. It was a fortress. I walked toward the door, my eyes fixed on the horizon. The rule's secret realm was waiting. The geniuses of the continent were waiting. They thought they were the main characters of this era. I was about to show them how wrong they were. I knew the trials weren't over. People were still waiting to see what I, Qin Futian, would do next. My daughter, Yi Qing, looked at me with expectation. She believed in me, and so did the rest of the family. They were waiting for me to lead them to a glory they hadn't seen in generations. Yi Changsheng was growing fast. He had started as an outsider, a mere amateur, but under my guidance, he was becoming something more. We moved through the sect, passing the ancient gates and the grand halls of the inner circle. To the others, these buildings were monuments of power. To me, they were just stone and wood, housing people with narrow minds. The inner gate disciples looked down on us. They were arrogant, led by people like Yan Fengjia, who thought they were untouchable. They didn't realize that I had the creation water and the backing of a system they couldn't comprehend. Even the Pure Heart Palace and the Heaven Pavilion, places usually reserved for the elite, were within my reach. I watched as the sect members obsessed over pills and spirit stones. They treated these things like miracles. To me, they were just tools. I used my internal energy to resist the pressure of their collective gaze. I knew they were hiding things, especially about the Zhao family and the hidden treasures of the sect. They tried to deceive me, but I saw through every lie. One disciple stepped forward, his eyes full of contempt. He didn't think I belonged here. He didn't know that Xian Jiju was standing by, ready to strike if I gave the word. The disciple mocked me, asking what kind of pills I had or what right I had to be here. I didn't bother answering. I just let my aura flare for a split second. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The rumors of my past, of the way I had handled the Chun and Lu families, began to circulate among the crowd. They realized I wasn't just another student. I was the man who had survived a shattered Dantian and come back stronger. In the training grounds, the environment was perfect, almost like a celestial realm. The energy here was thick. I felt my power surging, refining itself. Suddenly, a challenge was issued. It was a high-ranking member of the inner sect, someone who practiced the ocean cloud technique. He moved with the weight of the sea, his palms striking out like crashing waves. He thought he could drown me with one move. He was wrong. I met his strike with a single palm. The collision sounded like a mountain cracking open. I didn't move an inch, but he was sent reeling back 6 or 7 steps. His face went pale, his arm trembling. The crowd gasped. His hand wasn't just hurt, it was mangled, the energy I had injected into the strike tearing through his meridians. "Who taught you that?" the Yi family head asked, his voice shaking with disbelief. He couldn't understand how a young man like me could possess such devastating power. I looked at He Jianyun, who was watching from the shadows. I could see the fear growing in his eyes. He realized that all his schemes and all his geniuses were nothing compared to the strength I was hiding. I wasn't just a participant in their games anymore. I was the one rewriting the rules. I turned away from the defeated disciple and walked toward the Sun family's territory. There were more secrets to uncover, and more people who needed to be taught a lesson in humility. The storm was just beginning, and I was at the center of it. The arena was silent as Jiang Yunan's spear whistled through the air, aimed directly at my throat. To the crowd, I was just a target. To me, he was just another stepping stone. I felt the primal energy shifting within my broken meridians, hidden by the system's veil. Jiang Yunan's ancient sword body was impressive, but it lacked the weight of true authority. I didn't dodge. I didn't retreat. I met his lethal strike head-on. The collision sent a shock wave through the stone floor, cracking the foundation beneath our feet. Dust swirled, obscuring the view, but I could feel his spear trembling against my palm. I hadn't even drawn a weapon. Jiang Yunan's eyes widened in disbelief. He had poured everything into that strike, yet I stood like an immovable mountain. "Is that all?" I whispered. Before he could respond, a commotion erupted at the edge of the grounds. Elder Niao Wu and Elder Yu arrived, their faces flushed with rage. They weren't here to watch a fair fight. They were here for blood. Word had spread that I killed Yin Changsheng, an outer sect elder. To them, a mere disciple, a trash, with a shattered dantian. Killing an elder was an unforgivable sin. Elder Niao Wu stepped forward, his voice booming like thunder. He accused me of rebellion, claiming I had murdered a superior and disrupted the sect's peace. He didn't care about the truth. He only cared about the prestige of the God Sword team and the power I had supposedly stolen. I looked at the group of outer sect disciples cowering behind the elders. They were the ones who had witnessed the truth, but fear kept their mouths shut. I turned my gaze back to the elders. They saw me as a servant who had forgotten his place. They wanted to execute me right here, in front of everyone, to restore their twisted version of order. You speak of rules, I said, my voice calm despite the rising tension. But you only follow them when they suit you. Elder, you didn't want to hear it. He gestured for the elite disciples to surround the arena. Among them was Zhao Yi, a rising star ranked 32nd in the sect. He moved with a cold, calculated grace, his sword already half drawn. He looked at me with pity, as if I were already a dead man. The atmosphere shifted. It wasn't just a duel anymore. It was an execution. But I wasn't the one who was going to die. I felt the great emperor's summoning cards humming in my mental inventory. I felt Xian Jiju's loyalty anchoring my spirit. The elders thought they were the hunters, but they had walked straight into my domain. Zhao Yi lunged, his blade flickering like a serpent's tongue. His speed was incredible, a blur of silver light that aimed for my vitals. I shifted my weight, my movements fluid and effortless. I stepped into his guard, my fingers snapping against the flat of his blade. The vibration vibrated through his arm, forcing him to break his stance. I saw the fear flicker in his eyes. It was the same fear I saw in He Jianyan. They realized, too late, that I wasn't playing by their rules. I was the one rewriting them. The elders roared, calling for more disciples to join the fray. They were desperate to bury the truth under a pile of bodies. But as the wind picked up and the sky darkened, I knew the time for hiding was over. I was Qin Futian, and today, the Misty Sect would learn what true power looked like. The first step toward global dominance didn't start with a speech. It started with the fall of those who thought they were gods. I watched Jiang Yunan's spear whistling toward me, a streak of lethal silver aiming to tear through my chest. The crowd held its breath. They expected me to break, to fall, to finally show the weakness of a man with a shattered foundation. But I didn't flinch. Instead, I focused on the primal energy humming beneath my skin. The Misty Sect elders were watching from the high stands, their eyes greedy and cold. They thought this was just a duel between two rivals, but I knew better. This was a calculated test. They wanted to see if my connection to the Big Dipper Sword sect was real. Jiang Yunan's spear was fast, but to my eyes, it was sluggish. I stepped into his strike, my body moving with a fluid grace that defied logic. I didn't use a flashy technique. I simply tapped the side of his spear shaft with 2 fingers. The impact echoed like a temple bell. The vibration traveled up his arms, snapping his grip and sending the weapon spiraling into the dirt. The arena went silent. Jiang Yunan stumbled back, his face pale, his ancient sword body flickering like a dying candle. Is that all? I asked, my voice carrying to every corner of the square. I looked up at the elders. I could see Qin Xian and Lu Yuan whispering urgently. They were suspicious. For years, the Big Dipper Sword sect had been a legend, its power lost to time. Now, I was standing here, using their long-lost movements as if I'd practiced them for a lifetime. They thought I was a thief who had stumbled upon a treasure. They didn't realize I was the master of it. Suddenly, a group of disciples from the God Sword team stepped forward, led by an older warrior named Yi Changshen. He didn't have the arrogance of the younger students. He had the steady aura of a killer. He looked at the Big Dipper Sword command token hanging from my belt, his eyes narrowing. That token hasn't been seen in 40 years, Yi Changshen said, his voice gravelly. Where did a brat like you get it? I didn't answer him. I didn't have to. I felt the system in my mind pulsing, confirming that my influence was growing. Every shocked face in the crowd was another step toward my dominance. Yi Changshen didn't wait for a response. He signaled his men, and the atmosphere grew heavy. They weren't just surrounding the arena. They were forming a killing formation. I saw my ally, Gongsun Hong, move his hand toward his blade, but I caught his eye and gave a small, barely visible shake of my head. I wanted them to come at me. I needed them to. If you want to know where it came from, I said, stepping over Jiang Yunan's discarded spear, come and take it. The elders roared in fury. They saw my defiance as a death wish. They didn't see the two great emperor cards ready to be played. They didn't see Xian Zhizhu waiting in the shadows. To them, I was a cornered wolf. To me, they were just targets. Yi Changsheng lunged, his sword drawing a line of fire through the air. At the same time, the disciples unleashed a wave of sword chi that felt like a falling mountain. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, feeling the rhythm of the world. When I opened them, the air around me shattered. I wasn't just Qin Futian anymore. I was the storm they had foolishly invited into their home. The first strike was just the beginning. By the time the sun set, the Misty Sect wouldn't be looking for answers. They would be praying for mercy. The spear point grazed my back, drawing a thin line of heat. I didn't flinch. Jiang Yunan was frantic now, his eyes bloodshot as he stared at his broken weapon. He tried to double his strength, throwing everything into a desperate, high-pitched strike, but I moved faster. I parried his blade with a flick of my wrist, the sound of clashing steel ringing through the arena like a funeral bell. With a single, fluid motion, I sent his sword spinning into the dirt. I turned my gaze toward the great elder, Yi Changsheng. The air grew heavy with the weight of the god sword team's killing intent. They were moving in, their formations tightening like a noose. Yi Changsheng's face was a mask of cold fury. He claimed I was a thief, an outsider who had stolen the secrets of the Beidou sword. He told the crowd I was a menace who had slaughtered their kin and insulted the sect's honor. It was a pathetic performance. He wanted my life, but more than that, he wanted the power he thought I was hiding. You speak of honor while hiding behind a crowd, I said, my voice carrying over the murmurs of the disciples. If you want my head, stop talking and try to take it. Elder He, a man known for his ruthless streak, stepped forward alongside Yi Changsheng. They were powerful, their auras clashing against mine like tidal waves. To the onlookers, I was a dead man walking. They saw a lone disciple facing the combined might of the sect's elite. They didn't see the truth. They didn't see that I was already steps ahead of them. I thought of my daughter, Momo. I thought of the life I was building and the enemies I had to crush to protect it. These men saw me as a stepping stone for their own ambitions. They were wrong. I reached into my consciousness, feeling the cold, steady presence of the great emperor cards. I wasn't afraid of their numbers or their formations. Yi Changsheng signaled the attack. Dozens of swords rose as one, glowing with a fierce, blue light. The ground beneath my feet cracked from the sheer pressure. I stood in the center of the storm, my expression calm. I didn't need to run. I didn't need to hide. As the first wave of disciples lunged, I felt the system pulse. My primal energy surged, overflowing from my meridians and coating my skin in a faint, golden hue. I moved like a phantom, weaving through the forest of blades. Every strike they aimed at me hit nothing but air. I was a ghost in their machine, a glitch in their perfect formation. Is this the best the Misty Sect has to offer? I mocked, catching a sword blade between two fingers and snapping it like glass. The shock on their faces was priceless. They had spent decades cultivating, believing they were the masters of this world. In a single afternoon, I was tearing that delusion apart. I looked past the guards, straight at Yi Changsheng. He was starting to realize that he hadn't trapped a wolf. He had invited a god into his arena, and the price of that mistake was going to be everything he owned. I felt the shift in the wind. The real battle was finally beginning. By the time I was finished, the name Qin Futian wouldn't just be a memory. It would be a legend that made the heavens tremble. I raised my hand, and the sky darkened. It was time to show them what true power looked like. The situation was changing fast. It wasn't just about the outsiders anymore. My rise had sent ripples back to the Yi family. I learned that Yi Changsheng had been using the sect's influence to verify my background, sending high-ranking members of the Yi clan and even some elite scouts to dig into my past. They were obsessed with the idea that I had found some ancient treasure or a hidden inheritance. They couldn't accept that a man with a shattered dantian could stand this tall on his own. The whispers in the crowd were constant. Some said I was a fluke, while others claimed I was desperately clinging to a fading spark of talent. But to the family elders, I was a high-yield asset or a threat that needed to be neutralized. In the world of cultivation, you're either a tool for the clan or an obstacle in their path. I had already stepped both feet into the core of their storm. I'll handle the internal matters, I thought, my eyes tracking the black-robed figures moving in the shadows. You focus on cleaning up your own mess. I looked at the disciples of the Misty Sect. They were scrambling, trying to gather their wits after I snapped their formation. I saw a young woman, a genius of the Song family, stepping forward. She held the North Star sword, her face full of arrogance. She believed her talent was enough to bridge the gap between us. She leaped onto the stage, her energy flaring, aiming to prove herself by taking my head. "I will give my all," she shouted, her voice echoing as she launched toward me. I almost laughed. These people really didn't get it. They saw my broken dantian as a weakness, a hole in my armor. But as she closed the distance, her spear thrusting with lethal intent, I didn't flinch. To her, it looked like I was frozen in fear. To me, she was moving in slow motion. At the very last second, I shifted. The tip of her spear grazed my robe, hitting nothing but the lingering afterimage of my movement. The crowd gasped. The great Qin sect elders and the representatives from the Western Heaven Pavilion were all watching now. They were trying to read my energy, trying to see how a waste, like me, was still breathing. Little did they know, my dantian wasn't just repaired, it was evolved. It was a bottomless pit of primal energy that their pathetic senses couldn't even begin to comprehend. "Is that it?" I asked, my voice cold. "You talk about talent, but you move like a child." The high-ranking elders were starting to get nervous. They had sent their best, yet I was treating this like a training exercise. I heard the great elder shouting, telling the disciples to stop holding back. He was losing face, and in this world, face is everything. But then, the atmosphere shifted. A new group arrived, the elite forces from the super sects. These weren't just local bullies, these were the real powerhouses. They had heard rumors of an ancient secret hidden within the nearby valley, a place where the laws of yin and yang were blurred. They weren't here for the tournament. They were here for the treasure they thought I was hiding. "Look at them," I muttered, watching the representatives from the Flying Heaven sect and the Imperial Palace descend. Like vultures circling a kill. One of the young masters, a man named Su Qingming, stepped forward with an aura that suppressed everyone around him. He looked at me not as a rival, but as a curiosity. He didn't believe the rumors that I was a genius. To him, I was just a lucky peasant who had stumbled onto something he didn't deserve. "Give up the secret, Qin Futian," someone yelled from the crowd. "A waste like you can't protect it." I straightened my back, the golden hue of my energy shimmering brighter. I looked at the arrogant faces of the sect leaders, the greedy eyes of the elders, and the cold indifference of the super sect geniuses. They wanted my secrets? They wanted to see what a waste could do? "I'm not joining your sects," I announced, my voice carrying across the entire arena, silencing the chaos. "And I'm not giving you anything. From today on, the name Qin Futian won't be associated with your petty politics." I raised my hand, and the ground began to tremble. The system in my mind chimed, confirming my resolve. If they wanted a monster, I would give them one. I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was the one who was going to rewrite the rules of this world, and I'd start by tearing down every single person who thought they were above me. The crowd gasped as the Flying Heaven sect finally made their move. Su Qingming stood there, his brow furrowed, watching me like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve. But he wasn't the only one. High above, two powerful figures appeared at the edge of the sky. They were second-level warriors, their presence heavy and suffocating. Even from a distance, the pressure they emitted was undeniable. They were the elite of the elite, looking down at the arena as if deciding whether I was worth their time. Suddenly, a massive black stone ship descended from the clouds, hovering over the arena. It was a vessel from the Big Dipper Sword sect. A young man stood at the prow, his robes fluttering in the wind. This was Zhao Ritian. The crowd erupted at the sight of him. He was the great elder's prized disciple, the hope of the future. They said his talent rivaled the sun itself. He looked down at me with a pride that bordered on arrogance, his handsome face twisted into a smirk. To him, my ruined dantian wasn't a tragedy, it was a joke. He thought I was just a shell, a waste of space who happened to look the part of a cultivator. So this is the famous Qin Futian? Zhao Ritian's voice echoed, cold and mocking. A waste trying to play hero. You really think you can represent the North Star? I didn't blink. I could feel the eyes of the sect leaders and the thousands of spectators on me. They expected me to cower. They expected me to break under the weight of these geniuses. But they didn't know about the power coursing through my veins. They didn't know about the system or the cards I held in my hand. Jiang Yunan didn't wait for the pleasantries to end. He lunged forward, his spear whistling through the air. He wanted blood. He wanted to prove that my rise was a fluke. His strikes were relentless, aimed at my vitals, each one faster than the last. The ground beneath us cracked as he poured his energy into the attack. Die, you trash, he roared. I moved. I didn't use a flashy technique. I didn't need to. I stepped into his guard, my fist glowing with a faint, concentrated light. I met his spear head-on. The collision sent a shockwave through the arena, forcing the nearest spectators to shield their eyes. Is that all? I whispered. His eyes widened. He was a spirit realm expert, and I was supposed to be a mere third-stage chi refiner. By all logic, his energy should have crushed me. But it didn't. I felt the primal energy within me surge, shattering his momentum. I wasn't just defending, I was analyzing him. Every move he made was full of holes. I saw the confusion on the faces of the elders. They realized something was wrong. The waste was standing his ground against a genius. I threw a punch, my fist connecting with his chest. The sound of ribs snapping echoed across the silent field. Jiang Yunan flew backward, his spear clattering to the ground. You talk about levels and realms, I said, stepping over his broken weapon. But you don't understand true power. I looked up at Zhao Ritian on his high ship and the elders in their high seats. They wanted to see a show? I would give them a massacre. I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was the storm they never saw coming. If they wanted to hunt me like prey, they were going to find out that I was the one at the top of the food chain. This wasn't a fight for my life. This was the beginning of my reign. The crowd was silent, but the air was thick with disbelief. Lu Yuan and Zhou Mingyang stared at me, their faces twisting with a mix of shock and suppressed rage. They couldn't understand how a supposed waste like me had just shattered Jiang Yunan's ribs. Even Su Qieying, the elite from the second high school, looked unsettled. I could feel the eyes of the elders burning into my back. To them, my victory wasn't just an upset, it was an insult to their judgment. I didn't care about their pride. I turned away from the broken Jiang Yunan and walked toward the edge of the arena. I needed to keep moving. The system had given me a path, and this arena was just a small stepping stone. I returned to my quiet courtyard, the echoes of the battle still ringing in my ears. I picked up a simple broom and started to sweep. To anyone watching, I looked like a servant doing chores. But every movement of the broom was a calculation. I was practicing the basics of a sword technique I'd hidden from everyone. I gripped the handle like a hilt, my thumb pressing against the wood, feeling the flow of primal energy through my arms. I wasn't just cleaning, I was refining my body. My movements were slow, deliberate, and full of a power that no one in this sect could comprehend. I thought about the high-tech world I came from before I crossed over into this body. Back then, everything was about logic and data. Here, it was about blood and will. I practiced a few more strikes, the broom whistling through the air with the weight of a heavy spear. I felt the energy within me settle. I was ready for whatever the God Sword team or the elders threw at me next. Suddenly, a voice broke my focus. It was a girl, her footsteps light as she entered the courtyard. I recognized her. It was Qin Qingliao. She looked at me with a complicated expression, her eyes searching mine for answers I wasn't ready to give. Behind her, the atmosphere of the sect was changing. I could hear the distant laughter of the elders and the roar of the crowd from the main square. They were announcing the next phase of the competition. Qin Futian, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Who are you, really? I didn't answer. I just looked at her, my face a mask of calm. I knew the elders were planning something. They were opening a secret realm, a trial meant to weed out the weak and claim the strongest for themselves. They thought they were the ones in control. They thought they could use me as a pawn to test their geniuses. I saw a group of men in black robes lurking in the shadows of the trees surrounding my yard. They were the elite enforcers, the ones sent to handle problems quietly. They moved with the precision of trained killers, thinking I hadn't noticed them. I felt a cold smile tug at the corners of my mouth. "You can't run," one of them hissed from the darkness, his voice dripping with malice. I dropped the broom and let my hands hang loosely at my sides. I wasn't running. I was waiting. I had the Great Emperor summoning cards in my mind and Xianjiju at my back. If these people wanted to turn this sect into a graveyard, I was happy to oblige. "I'm not the one who needs to run," I replied. The first assassin lunged, a blade gleaming in the moonlight. I stepped forward, my primal energy surging once more. This wasn't a duel for honor anymore. This was a hunt. And they had no idea that they were the ones walking into a trap. I reached out, my hand moving faster than his eyes could follow, and gripped his throat. The reign of Qin Futian was no longer a dream. It was a bloody reality starting right here, in this dark courtyard. Jiang Yunan's spear lunged toward me, a streak of lethal light aimed straight for my heart. I didn't blink. The crowd held its breath, expecting to see my blood splash across the stone. My primal energy hummed under my skin, a silent beast waiting to be unleashed. I shifted my weight just an inch. The spear tip grazed my robe, whistling past me harmlessly. I glanced toward the edge of the arena. Ho Zimming stood there, his face pale and his eyes darting around like a trapped animal. I knew his secret. He had sold out his own allies to the sect elders just to save his own skin. Beside him was Jia Yuan. I noticed something strange about Jia Yuan's frame. His robes were bulky, but his movements were too fluid, his stature too slight. He was wearing a disguise, hiding a much smaller, more delicate figure beneath the layers. "You can't hide forever, Qin Futian," Jiang Yunan roared. He swung the spear in a wide arc, the air crackling with the power of his ancient sword body. I stepped back, my eyes scanning the perimeter. The elite god sword team was closing in, their blades unsheathed. They weren't waiting for the duel to end. They wanted me dead now. Suddenly, the ground trembled. A heavy, suffocating pressure descended on the plaza, chilling the air instantly. 3 figures emerged from the shadows of the surrounding peaks. These were the true overlords of the 15 territories, the geniuses that the elders had been boasting about. At the front was Meng Kun from Jiuhai Mountain. He didn't walk. He seemed to glide, his presence overshadowing everyone else in the arena. He looked at the chaos with total indifference. To him, we were all just insects fighting over crumbs. "Is this the one causing all the trouble?" Meng Kun asked, his voice echoing like thunder. He didn't wait for an answer. He raised a hand, and a wave of icy energy blasted outward. The disciples nearest to him were blown back like autumn leaves. Jiang Yunan froze, his arrogance vanishing in an instant. Even the Godsword team halted their advance. I stood alone in the center of the clearing. The elders were smiling now, convinced that Meng Kun would do their dirty work for them. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They thought my luck had finally run out. I felt the Great Emperor summoning cards pulsing in my mind. My general, Xianjiju, was ready to strike from the shadows. I looked Meng Kun in the eye and didn't flinch. He was strong, but he wasn't a god. "You're late to the party," I said, my voice calm. Meng Kun's eyes narrowed. He expected me to kneel. He expected me to beg. Instead, I channeled my energy, letting a fraction of my true power leak out. The stone beneath my feet cracked. The hunt was finally getting interesting. I wasn't the prey anymore. I was the one holding the blade. Dust and smoke swirled around the arena as a strange, purple light began to flicker from my body. It was faint at first, then it pulsed like a heartbeat. The crowd went silent. They were looking at the scoreboards, and the numbers were climbing at a terrifying speed. 10, 30, 50. It didn't stop until it hit 435. The silence turned into a deafening roar. Nobody believed a trash cultivator like me could produce a score that surpassed the elite geniuses. The elders from the Saint Lands looked on with grim expressions. They didn't want to stay here for days watching a farce. They wanted results. I stood up slowly, brushing the dust off my robes. I wasn't interested in a long, drawn-out struggle. I wanted to end this cleanly. "If you don't believe the numbers, come and see for yourselves," I challenged, my voice cutting through the noise. One of the elders, a man named Shirzei, stepped forward. He was a grandmaster alchemist, the kind of person who could see through any trickery. He looked at me with pure disdain. To him, I was just a lucky brat who had found a shortcut. He suspected I had used some forbidden pill or a hidden treasure to fake my power. A master can tell the difference between true strength and a cheap facade, Shirzei sneered. You think you can fool us with these numbers? I just smiled. I knew what they were thinking. They thought I was a fraud. They couldn't accept that a man with a shattered dantian had rebuilt himself into something far greater than their geniuses. Behind the scenes, rumors were already spreading. People were whispering about the 3 great talents from the Misty Boat, wondering if they were the ones who had actually cleared the beasts in the back mountains. They couldn't wrap their heads around the fact that I had taken down a late-stage beast with a single strike. Did you hear? A disciple whispered nearby. They say a super genius has emerged from the shadows. But it can't be him, right? I ignored them. My focus was on the upcoming intersect battle. I knew the stakes were rising. The elders were already plotting to send me to the dangerous back mountains under the guise of a mission. They wanted to test me, or more likely, they wanted me dead. Young master, it's impossible, my attendant whispered, his face pale. How could you be that fast? That beast was at the peak of its power. The world is bigger than you think, I replied. Meanwhile, the higher-ups were having their own secret meetings. 2 women, Zhao Zi and Wang Qiling, were standing near the elders. They were powerful, but they were being treated like pawns. One of the masters, a woman from the Yaopeng Peak, was eyeing them greedily. She wanted to steal them away from me, believing their talent was wasted by my side. I want you to go to the God Peak, the master told her disciple. Bring those 2 girls to me. I will make them my primary disciples. They shouldn't be serving a man whose chest is practically empty of true energy. They really didn't see it. They saw my outer shell and assumed I was hollow. They didn't see the great emperor's power flowing through my veins. They didn't see the general waiting in the shadows. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the training grounds, the atmosphere grew heavy. The next phase of the trial was about to begin. I looked at the elders, then at the arrogant geniuses who thought they owned the world. They were all waiting for me to fail. They were waiting for the trash to finally break. I tightened my grip on my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for my life anymore. I was fighting to show them that the world they knew was about to change. I looked toward the distant peaks of the Qing and Han academies. My journey was just beginning, and I was going to make sure they remembered the name Qin Futian. The 3 men from the 4 treasure dragons stood their ground, but they were nothing compared to the vastness of the world I now commanded. Su Xiaoxiao might have been skilled, but his power was limited. Su Jingming, standing behind him, carried an aura that couldn't be hidden for long. It didn't matter. Soon enough, I would show them that I could stand equal to the great emperors. I would drive away their ghosts and claim this territory as my own. I felt the divine instructions of the primal devouring heaven sword art pulsing through my veins. Every nerve in my body was refining itself. As the sword light exploded from the earth, it felt like a dream turning into reality. The pressure on my limbs was intense, but I welcomed it. I could feel my blood boiling, surging with a rose-colored energy that filled my veins. I had finally broken through. I reached the void vein stage, but I couldn't stop there. There were too many good things left to scavenge in this place. I didn't have time to waste listening to their nonsense. 9 golden dragons roared within me, their energy chaotic but powerful. I focused, channeling that raw force into a single, perfect strike. This wasn't just a move. It was a technique I had mastered by reading the patterns of those 9 dragons. It was a short, violent burst of power designed to shatter the spirit. I saw Su Jingming's face pale. He gasped, his breath hitching as the light of my technique reflected in his eyes. He looked like a man staring at his own grave. In that instant, the blood and spiritual energy in the air were torn apart. The battlefield became a whirlpool of chaos. My strike didn't just hit him. It washed over him like a celestial tide, crushing his spiritual core. I watched as his internal defenses crumbled. The core he had worked so hard to build was now just fuel for my own growth. I carefully gathered the spiritual essence, the very heart of his power, and tucked it away. My family's ancestors had taught that all things could be created and destroyed, and I was proving them right. I used the primal water to refine the essence, merging it with my own spiritual foundation. Let's move, I said, my voice cold. There's more to find before others get here. I didn't want anyone to see what I had done. If the others realized I was harvesting spiritual cores, they would hunt me down. These cores were supposed to be unusable, mere remnants of dead power, but through my system, I could transfer that energy directly into my own pool. The aura around me shifted, growing stronger with every breath. I looked at Zhao Ritian and the others. They were starting to look like ants to me. I had already killed Lu Boren, Zhou Mingho, and Li Taishan. Their deaths were just stepping stones. I felt a sudden wave of exhaustion hit me, a side effect of the chaotic energy, but I pushed through it. If I stayed here, I'd be discovered. The bitter sea within my soul was churning like a storm. Every bad thing that had happened to me, every insult, was being forged into a weapon. The beasts in this core area were supposed to be terrifying, but to me, they were just targets. Don't kill me. Please, don't kill me. Someone screamed, their voice echoing through the clearing. I didn't even blink. Why should I? The gap between us was too wide now. The strongest beasts in this core area were barely a challenge. I heard the elders whispering in the distance, talking about Zhao Zi and how she was wasted on me. They called me a waste, a failure. They thought they had a big plan for her, claiming I was just a hindrance to her potential. They were still playing their little games, treating us like pieces on a board. They didn't realize that I had already flipped the table. I wasn't the one being delayed. I was the one setting the pace. And soon, they would realize that the waste they despised was the only thing standing between them and total annihilation. A young man stood next to Zhao Zi, his eyes full of arrogance. He was looking at me like I was something he could just brush aside. He started stirring up the crowd, whispering that I was just a fluke, a waste who didn't deserve to stand on the same stage as someone like her. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to explain my path to anyone. Zhao Zi looked at me, her expression complicated. I had spent 7 days straight sitting in that cave, pushing my limits while everyone else assumed I was just hiding. She was talented, sure, but she was still playing by the world's rules. I was rewriting them. I could tell she hadn't realized the gap between us yet. I had already entered a state where my primal energy was flowing into the deepest parts of my being, forging a strength that surpassed any basic martial arts circle. My senior brother wants you as his plaything, someone sneered from the sidelines. They really thought they could use Zhao Zi to bait me, treating her like a prize and me like a stepping stone. They didn't realize that their big plan was a joke. I wasn't the one stuck in a bottleneck. They were the ones stuck in a delusion. Zhao Wuji was already counting his riches, acting like Zhao Zi's future was a commodity he could sell to the highest bidder. Her family didn't even blink at the cruelty of it. A long-haired disciple stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with a murderous light. Zhao, let me handle this waste for you, he shouted. I almost laughed. I had heard enough. Everyone was talking about sects and legacies, but all I saw were people waiting to starve or be crushed. I did this myself, I muttered under my breath. Every breakthrough, every kill, every bit of power I held, I earned it. While they relied on their ancestors and their names, I was hunting in the shadows, growing stronger while they slept. Suddenly, the air cracked. A massive surge of energy flew across the arena. It was Zhao Wushu. He acted like he was a god looking down from the heavens, convinced that I was just a piece of trash that hadn't died yet. He launched a sequence of 3 devastating punches, each one aimed to shatter my very soul. The first punch came whistling through the air, then the second, then the third. He thought I couldn't escape. But I wasn't just standing there. I moved. I saw Zhao Zi's eyes widen as I dodged the strikes that should have ended me. Wang Yuan, another elite, tried to step in, thinking he could protect the stage from the mess I was making. He didn't realize he was just another target. I plunged deep into the fray. The swords around me were a blur, but to my eyes, they were moving in slow motion. I saw Huang Yuan's techniques. They were flashy, sure, but they were hollow. I wanted to see what these prodigies were actually made of. I stepped inside his guard, my fingers grazing his neck. His face went pale. The arrogance vanished, replaced by pure, raw terror. Don't kill me. Please, don't kill me, he blubbered. I looked at the crowd. They couldn't believe it. This was the great Wang Shangxian, a man of status, now groveling on the floor like a dog. Jiang Yunan tried to retreat, his face a mask of tears and snot. It was pathetic. A moment ago, he was a warrior. Now, he was just a broken boy. I didn't feel pity. I felt disgusted. The people who were supposed to be the future of this world were nothing but cowards when faced with real death. The number of people hunting me had grown from a few dozen to hundreds. They were all converging, hoping to snatch the treasures they thought I was carrying. Let's just go to the Valley of the Sages, someone whispered in the crowd, terrified of being caught in the crossfire. I turned my gaze back to Zhao Zi. Her eyes were trembling. Get out of here, I said, my voice cold. She didn't argue. She and Ming Erzi turned and fled, their hearts racing as they realized the monster I had become. Back in the shadows, the elders were watching, their faces twisted in rage. They called me arrogant and ignorant, claiming I didn't understand the loss I was causing the sect. One of them, Yishan, calmed his disciple, Dong Lu. Don't be impulsive, he warned. The true assessment is next month. He's just a stray who wandered in. Dong Lu bowed his head, his fists clenched tight. I'm sorry, master, he hissed, his voice dripping with venom. But I can't let this go. I won't let this go. I watched them from a distance, a cold smile forming on my lips. Let them plan. Let them hate. They were all just fuel for the fire I was building. I watched them leave, my expression calm as I turned back to the task at hand. I needed to focus on my cultivation. The elders were still whispering, their eyes filled with a mix of greed and resentment. Yishan was trying to maintain order, promising the others that he would handle the situation. He knew the Saint Valley was nearby, and the air was thick with the scent of spirit herbs and the distant roar of great beasts. I will handle this, Yishan repeated, his voice low. He glanced at Zhao Zi and the others, motioning for them to follow his lead. The true assessment is next month. Qin Futian's dantian is shattered. He can't truly advance. He's just a flash in the pan. He turned to his disciple, Dong Lu, who was ranked 4th among the inner disciples. You'll be participating in the trial too. If you want revenge, that's the place to give him a lesson he'll never forget. Do you understand? Dong Lu bowed low, a dark smirk tugging at his lips. I understand, master. I didn't care about their little plots. I was already moving toward the Great Peaks. Every 10 years, groups of cultivators flocked here, risking their lives for a chance at greatness. I had reached the 98th peak of the giant mountains, a place where the air grew cold and the pressure intensified. This wasn't just any mountain. It was a place where the Big Dipper's starlight gathered, nourishing rare herbs and powerful monsters. As I climbed, I saw a movement in the distance. A group of disciples from the North Star Sword sect were scouting the area. They were looking for honey and rare medicines, hoping to strike it rich before the main trial began. But they weren't alone. Suddenly, a swarm of cold warm bees erupted from a nearby cliff. These weren't ordinary insects. Their sting could freeze a man's blood or burn his skin. Behind them, a group of disciples, Nyo Air, Nyo San, and others, were running for their lives. They looked like a pack of frightened dogs fleeing a tiger. Look over there, someone shouted, pointing toward the valley. It was a chaotic scene. A massive iron-headed bull was rampaging through the brush, its horns dripping with blood. It had already gored several cultivators, and now it was closing in on a group led by a man named Zhuo Wei. They were cornered. Elder Zhuo, we have nowhere left to run, one of the disciples screamed, his voice cracking with terror. Zhuo Wei gritted his teeth, his eyes darting around for an exit. Then we fight. It's better to die on our feet than cower like animals. They tried to push back, but the bull was a Tier 3 beast, far beyond their strength. I watched from the shadows as Zhuo Wei launched a desperate strike, his fists glowing with a faint energy. He managed to land a blow, but the bull barely flinched. It let out a deafening roar, its eyes turning a deep, murderous red. Just as the bull was about to crush them, a flash of light cut through the trees. Several elite disciples from the Heavenly Spirit Cave arrived, led by a man wielding a lightning-infused blade. They moved with a precision that Zhuo Wei's group lacked. In seconds, the air was filled with the sound of clashing steel and the smell of ozone. They weren't here to save anyone, though. They were here for the loot. Specifically, they were after a 3-ring spirit herb growing near the bull's den. I watched the battle unfold, my mind racing. The power dynamics here were shifting fast. These geniuses were all fighting over scraps while I was looking at the bigger picture. I saw the way they moved, the dragon thunder sword style, the wooden horse technique. It was all impressive to the common eye, but to me, it was full of holes. One of the disciples managed to grab the herb, but he didn't hold it for long. A burst of energy from the side sent him flying. Another group had arrived, and they were even stronger. The pressure in the valley was becoming suffocating. 2 Tier 5 cultivators were now facing off, their auras clashing like thunderclouds. The ground beneath them cracked, and the surrounding trees were leveled by the sheer force of their presence. I stayed hidden, observing their footwork and their energy flow. They were fast, but I was faster. I could see the path they were taking toward the second level of the Pill Pavilion, a place rumored to hold medicines that could regrow limbs and restore shattered foundations. I noticed a familiar set of footprints in the dirt. I had seen these before. My old allies and rivals were all converging on the same point. Gong Sun Hong was there too, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He wasn't looking for herbs. He was looking for a fight. I felt a surge of anticipation. These people thought they were the hunters, but they were just prey waiting for the right moment. I began to move, my steps silent against the frozen ground. I didn't need a team. I didn't need their permission. I caught sight of 3 figures in the distance, the 5 army brothers. They were notorious for their teamwork and their ruthlessness. They were currently chasing down a group of survivors, laughing as they toyed with their victims. I stepped out from the shadows, a cold smile on my face. It was time to remind them who really owned this mountain. I had just entered the pulse-opening realm, and my energy was boiling beneath my skin. They didn't see me coming until it was too late. "Who's there?" one of the brothers barked, spinning around. I didn't answer with words. I answered with power. The hunt had officially begun. I watched the crowd, their eyes glued to the golden lion manifestation towering behind me. They were whispering, wondering if I had already finished off the assassins sent to chase me down. I didn't care about their rumors. I looked at Lu Yuan, who was still trying to act superior. I told him I could clear a path for him, but it wouldn't be free. I wanted 20 spirit stones. He looked offended, reminding me of how things used to be. I didn't blink. That was then, and this was now. In this world, power dictated the price. Suddenly, the mountain air roared. A bridge made of dragon eagles stretched across the sky, connecting us directly to the distant Taishan Peak. It was a massive distance, a shortcut through the clouds. I stayed low, keeping my energy suppressed as the massive birds circled above. I wasn't ready to trigger their aggression just yet. Jiang Yunan was still coming for me, his spear humming with lethal intent. He thought his ancient sword body made him invincible. I decided to show him a different kind of power. I wasn't just a fighter, I was a master of alchemy. I felt the energy in my Dantian boil. I unleashed a burst of primal force that looked like a pill furnace exploding. A thick, medicinal mist swirled around the arena, suffocating and blinding. The 3 Palace Cannon Sword team tried to break through the fog. They were fast, but my array was already thinning their ranks. I tapped into the energy of the spirit tree nearby, letting its life force flow through my veins. I saw the shock on Muron Yin's face in the distance. She couldn't believe a man with a supposed broken foundation could move with such grace. I raised my right hand toward the sky. I didn't need a fancy stance. The air around me began to vibrate as hundreds of swords manifested from pure chi. The crowd screamed, thinking I was about to be impaled by my own technique. I just smiled. I was in the pulse-opening realm now. My energy was vast, and my control was absolute. With a flick of my wrist, I commanded the sword sea. The ground beneath us shattered. A massive wave of energy, carrying the weight of the sun and moon peak, slammed into the elite teams. It wasn't just a strike, it was a slaughter. The God Sword team was thrown back like ragdolls, their formations crumbling in an instant. "Run! Get out of here!" someone screamed. The arena turned into a scene of pure chaos. People were trampling each other to escape the fallout of my power. They realized too late that they weren't watching a fair fight. They were watching a massacre. I stood in the center of the destruction, my breath steady. The hunt had officially turned, and I was the only one left standing. Jiang Yunan was supposed to be the genius who would crush me. But as the smoke cleared, he was just a man covered in the dust of his own failure. His ancient sword body flickered like a dying candle. I watched him struggle to stand, his pride shattered along with the arena floor. The crowd was silent now. They had come to see an execution, but they were witnessing a rebirth. I heard the whispers starting up in the stands. People were mentioning Ji Yuesheng and the other elite disciples from the surrounding 9 provinces. They were all here to witness my downfall. They thought I was a dead man walking because I had offended every major power in the region. Let them think that. I had spent 3 days and nights locked in the Danyao Pavilion, pushing my soul to the breaking point to refine my energy. I wasn't the same man who had arrived here. The air grew heavy with a strange mixture of scents. There was the metallic tang of blood and the sweet, heavy aroma of medicinal pills. I saw the elite teams from the 3 super sects trying to regroup. They were fast, moving like a flock of startled birds in a dark forest. They thought they could overwhelm me with numbers and coordinated strikes. I didn't give them the chance. I tapped into my spirit fire, letting the heat radiate from my palms. The flames didn't just burn, they dominated. I saw the shock on the faces of the sect elders as their precious formations crumbled under the sheer weight of my chi. The Godsword team was supposed to be unstoppable. Now, they were just targets. Lu Yuan and the others looked on in horror. They couldn't understand how someone with a broken foundation could possess such pure, violent power. I moved through the chaos with a fluidity that defied logic. Every strike I landed felt like I was settling a debt. 3 years of humiliation and 2 months of hiding were finally being repaid in full. I felt the energy of the spirit tree surging within me, fueling my every move. I looked at the black and white energy swirling in my hands, a perfect balance of destruction and creation. The survivors were backing away, their eyes filled with a fear they couldn't hide. They realized too late that I wasn't trapped in here with them. They were trapped in here with me. I took a deep breath, tasting the charred air. The hunt wasn't over yet. I needed to do it again. I needed to show them that the name Qin Futian was something to be feared across the globe. I raised my hand one more time, the spirit fire roaring to life. I had to keep going. Again and again, until no one was left to challenge me. I had to do it again. My movements were subconscious, a blur of speed that defied everything they knew about cultivation. I moved faster than the first round, faster than anyone thought possible. The crowd pushed back, clearing a wide circle around me. Even the 3 great sect elders stayed their distance. No one dared to speak. They were watching a miracle or a monster, and in this world, there isn't much difference between the two. I stood in the center of the chaos, facing down the elite. They couldn't believe a man with a shattered foundation was pushing them into a corner. I saw the fear in their eyes. It was a legendary sight, the fall of the arrogant. The Godsword team, once symbols of absolute power, were now just obstacles in my path. I scanned the area, my gaze cold. No one could track my movements. I was a ghost in the machinery of their destruction. Suddenly, a figure stepped forward from the crowd. It was Su Jinlin, a man claiming to be over 10,000 years old, a vice sect master of the heavenly sect. He looked at me with a mix of disdain and curiosity. "You think you're impressive?" he sneered. He tried to defend Jiang Yunan, claiming my rival only lost because of a mistake. But the crowd wasn't buying it. They started shouting, mocking the excuses. "If he's so great, why is he on the ground? You go up then. You try it." I didn't wait for his permission. I delivered a slap so powerful it carried no fancy techniques, just raw, violent strength. It was pure impact. Jiang Yunan tried to use his bronze vein stage cultivation to resist, but it was like a bug trying to stop a landslide. My palm connected, and the sound echoed through the arena. He didn't even have time to dodge. He relied too much on his status and not enough on the reality of the fist coming for his face. The impact sent him flying. It was an exaggeration of power that left the spectators breathless. I was at the peak of the bronze vein stage, a level where I could kill ordinary cultivators with a flick of my wrist. But I had the treasures of the 3-1 system backing me. My chi didn't just flow, it roared. I thought about the enemies from my past, the ones who had pushed me to the brink of death. They had killed so many of my brothers. They had laughed while I bled. Now, the debt was being collected. Hong Wuyan and Tai Shan appeared by my side, their presence causing the crowd to scatter. They looked at me, then at the mess I'd made of the elite disciples. They knew I had just come from the heavenly book pavilion. They knew I had slaughtered the chaos beasts in the forbidden forest without breaking a sweat. To them, I was the man who had survived a shattered Dantian and returned as something far more dangerous. I looked at the sect elders. They called my moves weak and chaotic, but their shaking hands told a different story. I raised my hand, gathering my spiritual energy once more. I controlled the wind, turning the very air into a weapon. I didn't just want to win, I wanted to erase their arrogance. I moved through the 3 great formations like they were made of paper. 3 years of humiliation. 3 years of being treated like trash. It all came down to this. I spun my energy faster and faster, a whirlwind of black and white power that centered on me. I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was the storm. And as I looked at the terrified faces of those who once looked down on me, I realized the hunt was only beginning. I would keep turning, keep striking, until the whole world knew my name. I spun through the air, my movements a blur of calculated chaos. 1 rotation, 2, 3. The 3-1 system surged within me, turning my spiritual energy into a roaring tide. The crowd gasped as I unleashed a flurry of strikes. These weren't just attacks. They were years of suppressed rage finding an exit. "Look at his sword," someone shouted from the stands. I didn't need to look. I felt the blade connect. 1 strike was all it took to shatter the defenses of a 3-star realm disciple. Even the flood dragon summoned by the elite disciples of the Wuji sect was nothing more than a target. With a single, heavy swing, I swatted the beast aside like a common fly. The dragon hit the ground with a bone-crushing thud, dead before it could even roar. The silence that followed was deafening. The Wuji sect's great elder looked like he had swallowed a stone. His prized disciple was gone, his sect's pride was trampled, and he was left staring at the wreckage of his arrogance. People began to whisper, their voices trembling with a mix of awe and terror. They saw a monster where they once saw a cripple. Is he really just a student? A voice wondered aloud. He just slapped a heavenly king realm expert into the dirt. 3 slaps for 3 gods. He's insane. I ignored the chatter. My eyes were fixed on the horizon, sensing the shift in the air. The 3 major sects wouldn't let this go. They couldn't. I had humiliated them on a global stage, and in this world, pride was worth more than blood. But I wasn't afraid. I had survived the Gui secret realm where I hunted thousands while the super geniuses ran for their lives. I had faced the chaos beasts. These elders were just next on the list. Suddenly, a familiar presence cut through the tension. Princess Gongsun Hong stepped forward, her eyes scanning the aftermath. Beside her stood Duan, the master alchemist, and Murong Ying. They looked at the carnage I'd created, then at me. Qin Futian is a student of the Imperial Academy, the princess announced, her voice ringing out like a silver bell. Anyone who moves against him moves against the throne. Disperse. Now, Lu Yuan, standing among the elite disciples, gritted his teeth. His face was a mask of fury and envy. He had spent years building his reputation as the North King's pride, only to be overshadowed by a man who was supposed to be a ghost. He looked at me, his hand white-knuckled on his sword hilt. He wanted to strike, but the presence of the princess and the alchemist master stayed his hand. "Master," Lu Yuan hissed, turning to a stern-looking man beside him. "We can't let him leave like this. He's a threat." The master didn't answer immediately. He watched me with cold, calculating eyes. "He is more than a threat, Lu Yuan. He is a variable we didn't account for." I walked toward them, my footsteps steady on the blood-stained stone. I could feel the system buzzing in the back of my mind, a constant reminder of the power I now held. My sisters in the system were already whispering, their voices echoing in my consciousness. Detection complete. The system's cold voice vibrated in my head. New energy signature identified. "Host, your potential is expanding." I stopped a few paces from Lu Yuan. The air between us crackled with killing intent. He looked at me like I was a bug he had failed to crush, but I saw the flicker of doubt in his pupils. He knew. Deep down, he knew the gap between us was closing, or perhaps it had already vanished. "You think a few flashy moves make you a king?" Lu Yuan sneered, though his voice lacked its usual bite. I leaned in, a cold smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. I don't think I'm a king, Lu Yuan. I know I'm the one who's going to bury you. I turned my back on him, walking away as the sun began to set, casting long, jagged shadows across the arena. The hunt wasn't over. It was just getting started. I had the cards, I had the power, and for the first time in 3 years, I had the world right where I wanted it. Under my thumb. I looked at the massive crowd gathered before me. There were so many of them, a sea of faces all fueled by the same greed and hatred. To anyone else, this would have been a nightmare. To me, it was just a collection of people taking a collective step toward their own graves. They were all looking for death. I didn't say a word. I just stood there and let a slow, mocking smile spread across my face. That was all it took. My silence and that grin hit them like a physical insult. In an instant, I had enraged every single one of them.